Hello, welcome to the Manasplained podcast. I'm Connor. Today I'll be talking about the deck I built for Johan. So Johan is a 6-mana 5/4 that gives your creatures vigilance if he does not attack and is untapped during your turn. That's what he does. The Oracle text reads differently. It's because it's an old card. They had to make it fit within the rules, but that's essentially what happens. So you're a 6-mana commander that just gives your creatures vigilance that can't attack himself. That's it. So it's better than some of the other legends I've built decks for so far, absolutely, but that is still a pretty steep cost, and I couldn't really figure out what I was going to do for the deck. So I went on EDH Rec just to see what other people have done, and there was 118 or 188, something like that, decks posted there for Johan, which was a lot more than I thought there was going to be. And something I didn't realize, because I've never played with creatures like this, because I just never had to put them in a deck before, is the exert mechanic. So the way exert works is you may exert a creature as it attacks, and if you do, it will not untap during your next untap step. But you can give them vigilance with Johan. So because of that, the whole won't untap during your next untap step clause gets negated, because they never tapped in the first place. So you can attack with them each time. It's not like they have to take a turn off to rest or whatever, like the exert mechanic is supposed to work. This just lets them keep attacking over and over. So it's like you have a glory bringer that exerts every single turn or something like that. So yeah, I thought that was really cool, so I decided to build around that and then kind of focus on that theme and then put some other cards to surround that package of exert that would work really well. So I really hope you enjoyed the deck. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. I post videos twice a week, Wednesdays and Saturdays. I try to get them on those days. Sometimes they'll move around. I'm trying to get my schedule a little more predictable and at 6 o'clock Atlantic time on both of those days. And yeah, I'm happy, and I'd love to talk with you guys down in the comments after these videos go up. So for the deck breakdown, we have 20 theme cards, which are the 20 creatures with exert, 10 sub-theme cards, 2 synergy cards, and 4 protection cards, as well as 10 draw, 12 ramp, 10 removal, 1 board wipe, and 36 lands. So with this breakdown, I'm really happy. I managed to get 10 draw, 12 ramp, and 10 removal. I always love when I get hit 10 or plus on all of those numbers. Only 1 board wipe, and the board wipe is very synergistic with the rest of the deck, which is great. And then I'll get into what the other categories, like the synergy and sub-theme, are later, but all of this together equals 6 crossover cards, which is less than normal. But the exert creatures tend to be pretty specific. They tend to like buff themselves or do other things like that, like make something unable to block this turn. Like a lot of them don't have huge impacts in a commander style setting, but some of them do. And I was able to get some crossover there, as well as some other categories. But like I said before, I like to get this number over 10 when I can. Unfortunately, only 6 this time. So like I said, the theme is exert creatures, and I'll go over them now. Some of them are definitely better than others. I did not put all of the exert creatures in the Naya colors in this deck because some of them are just not very good. But I picked the best 20, at least for what I was trying to do, and I hope you like them. So these are kind of the best exert creatures in the deck, and they kind of show off what you can do with exert on just like a kind of like a spattering of them. So Champion of Ronas lets you put a creature from your hand onto the battlefield, which is awesome. It's not tapped and attacking, unfortunately. It's just cheating it out, but that's okay. Watchful Naga draws you a card. Combat Celebrant, if it hasn't been exerted this turn, you may exert it, so it isn't infinite combat steps, but Combat Celebrant will get you an extra combat every turn because of the vigilance, which is crazy. Takrop Elite gives all of your creatures +1/+1 until the end of turn, and then Glorybringer deals 4 damage to target non-dragon creature an opponent controls when it exerts. So this kind of shows you what some of the best of each of the exert creatures are. Glorybringer is a house. It already has haste, which is great. 4/4 flying. Like Glorybringer is crazy, and the fact that when it exerts, it deals the 4 damage before your opponent can go to blockers lets you potentially get rid of like a 2/2 with Death Touch or something like that. Get rid of some of the pesky blockers that you wouldn't want to have to deal with. These are the exert creatures that their abilities proc whenever any of your creatures exert. So Battlefield Scavenger lets you rummage, where you discard then draw. Resolute Survivors deals 1 damage to each opponent, then you gain 1 life, which if you exert with 4 creatures, that's 12 damage to them, 4 life for you, which is a 16 life total swing on the board, which is like crazy. True Heart Twins gives your entire board +1/+0 until the end of turn, so it doesn't buff your toughness, but it does give you a power boost, and it's each time you exert a creature. So exert like 4 creatures, each creature gets +4/+0 until the end of turn, which is crazy. Vizier of the True lets you tap creatures so that you get free attacks in, get rid of, again, some pesky blockers that way too. And then Rohirrim Chargers is really interesting. This deck isn't running a ton of equipment, but Rohirrim Chargers lets you cheat equipment from your library onto the battlefield and then equipped onto creatures you control. So I do have 3 equipment in this deck. I'll get to what they are later. But this ability to cheat equipment out and be able to like fetch equipment in this way, it is revealed, so you don't get to pick it. It's the first equipment you find. But this creature's really cool. I really like it. And it's whenever you exert a creature. So I could feel this card like maybe if you want to take a different route, maybe make an exert equipment something. I don't know. Maybe you could do, someone could do something with that. But yeah, Rohirrim Charge is ridiculous. The amount of mana cheating you can do with that is crazy. So these group of exert creatures kind of mess with the blocking ability of your opponent. Clockwork Droid, when you exert it, it just is unblockable, and it lets you scry one, which is a great little amount of advantage right there. Oketra's Avenger makes it so that prevents all damage that would be dealt to it, which is fantastic at being a 3/1. That's kind of important. Rona Stalwart gets +1/+1, and then it can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less, so it can't be chump blocked. And then On-Crop Crasher makes it so that one of your creatures can't be blocked this turn as well. So this all lets you get combat damage through, or like protects the creature in some way, which is some of the better exert abilities I saw. And then finally, these are all the exert creatures in this deck that kind of buff themselves. So a lot of them is +1/+0, +1 something, like +2/+2, stuff around there. They sometimes also give other abilities like Glorybound Initiate gets Lifelink, or Emberhorn Minotaur gets Menace, stuff like that. But these are just good rates, because like Hooded Brawler is 3 mana 5/4 after it exerts and stuff like that. So these are just creatures with solid rates that sometimes get a little extra ability to help you get through or gain some life or any of those things like that. So the sub-theme of this deck is haste. You want to be able to attack with these creatures the turn they enter to get even more value out of them. So you'll ramp out a bit, and then you'll get a haste enabler out, then you get Johan out, then you start slamming these creatures and go into town with them. And there's a lot of good haste enablers in these colors, and I'm excited to show you what they are now. These are kind of the 3 most interesting ones in the deck. Urbrask the Hidden makes so your opponents can't get blockers out because their creatures enter tapped. So they have to wait a full rotation of the board or a full rotation of turns until your creatures can become blockers, which helps you get damage through a lot quicker. It means that people can't like immediately summon a board full of blockers or something with token generators and stuff. So yeah, Urbrask is very good that way. Ogre Battle Driver gives your creatures +2/+0 and haste whenever they enter, so it lets your creatures like start really hitting for a ton of damage early. It's fantastic. And then Rhythm of the Wild, it's great because it's one of the few haste enablers that'll synergize with another one. So say you have an Urbrask out, having a Rhythm, if Rhythm of the Wild only gained haste, then that wouldn't be that useful. But it gives your creatures Riot, so they can get a +1/+1 counter on them if you don't need to give them haste, which again, just a bump to their power lets you deal more damage, and creature spells you control can't be countered, which is just a great another ability to have in a creature focused deck like this. 2 of the classics, Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots. If you're only slamming 1 creature a turn, say it's like a 4 mana creature with Exert, you could then spend the 1 mana from Swiftfoot Boots or the 0 mana from Lightning Greaves to then equip it onto that. It's not as good if you're dropping multiple creatures in a turn because you can only give one of your creatures haste, but at the same time, also the protection that these give if you need to throw it on Johan or one of your more important Exert creatures like a Glorybringer, the modal functionality there is very useful. And then the last of the haste enablers are all these 3 mana ones. Fervor is a classic, just creatures you control have haste, fires the Yavimaya. Apparently used to be really good in standard, giving your creatures haste, then later on you can sack it to get a +2/+2 bump until the end of turn, which is wild. Rising of the Day, there's not many legends, maybe the only legend in this deck is your commander. maybe another card, but that part's less important because it is just, again, another fervor. Hammer of Perforos is a worse fervor in a way because it's also an artifact, so it makes it easier to remove. And then Tuk Tuk Rumblefort's probably the worst one here, even though it can block because it's 0/3, because it's a creature, it's the most vulnerable to removal. So there's only 2 synergy cards. It's because the deck is pretty synergistic in of itself, the commander synergizing with the entire theme that way, and then the sub-theme also being insanely synergistic that way. And I couldn't really fit a lot more cards in the deck, so I was only able to fit 2 slots here, but they're both very nice, and I'm glad I have them in here. So these are the 2 synergy cards. They both work without Rohirrim Rim Chargers, but with them out and being able to attack and exert, and other creatures exerting, these cards are even stronger. So Dragon Throne of Tart here, since Vigilance only matters when your creature goes to combat and like declares the attack, and then once you're like in combat before damage is declared, Vigilance doesn't matter anymore. You can then tap Johan with Dragon Throne of Tarkir and give your board a +5/+5 boost, which that is insane. That is so much damage. You have 3 creatures out, that's 15 extra damage on board. That's crazy. And then Embercleave, standard monster, works great if you have it in hand. If you attack with 4 creatures, it only costs 2 red to play and then equip to give something +1/+1 in double strike and trample, so you can make sure you get through. But also with Rohirrim Chargers, if you can pull this out, slap it onto something like that, or maybe like I said, Glorybringer before, because Glorybringer's insane. Yeah, these cards work great with Rohirrim Chargers, and they're just really good in the deck because it's so combat focused, and your commander is not attacking ever and will be able to be tapped with Dragon Throne of Tarkir to give that bonus. So for the protection category, you've already seen 3 of the cards, but one of the cards is very interesting. So you've already seen Lightning Greaves, Swift Boost, and Rhythm in the Wild, but Sereth the Viper's Fang is very cool here because all of your creatures are going to have hexproof all the time, except for Sereth, of course. And it also has the ability to untap another target creature or land you control. So say you have the Dragon Throne of Tarkir on your commander and you had 5 mana, you could activate that twice or something if you wanted to do that. But Sereth is in here to give all of your other creatures hexproof. Yeah, it's very cool. If one of your creatures ends up getting tapped some way as well, you can use this to untap it because of the exert trigger will not let it untap during your untap step. Yeah, I think this card is just really cool, and I think it works super well in this deck. So for the draw package, since our commander has 5 power, we're able to dip into some of the green draw that cares about that, because I think 5 is kind of high enough for those kind of spells. 4 is like, it's close to good enough, but 5 and 6 and 7 is when you really start getting like 1-to-1 value or close enough to that where it's worth it. And because of Johan, because we're attacking all the time, you do have some cards that care about that. And then there's one draw spell in this deck that is really interesting because you can enchant Johan with it. So these are the stereotypical green one-off draw spells. They're all great. I love them so much. Especially Rishkars here, being able to, you could potentially cast the Rishkars into a Soul's Majesty or a Harmonize, which would be ridiculous, but you're more likely to cast Rishkar and then drop a creature onto the battlefield. Hopefully you have an haste enabler out already, and then you can start attacking with that, which is great. These are the 2 enchantments in the deck that draw cards. Garruk's Uprising, also giving your creatures trample, which is fantastic. And Prophetic Ravings. You can equip this onto Johan, and then activate it later on after your combat step is done during your turn, and then you can rummage. You discard and draw a card, which is fantastic. Like, being able to do this every turn, being able to filter through cards, is technically not it's not card advantage, because your hand size is staying the same, but it's filtering through cards and letting you get to more impactful pieces sooner. And these are the last card draw cards in the deck. You've already seen Battlefield and Watchful Naga. They both are exert cards that draw you cards, which is great. And then Aroan Frostfang and Toski Bear of Secrets. Whenever your creatures deal combat damage, you get to draw. Toski is indestructible, so it's hard to remove. It has to attack each combat, and it's only a 1/1, so it usually gets easily blocked, but that's perfectly fine. And then Aroan Frostfang giving all of your creatures Death Touch, which is crazy. Like, your attacking creatures get Death Touch, and when they deal combat damage, you apply your draw card. That is wild. This card is so good. It came out in the populate Precon back in Commander 2019, I think. And ever since then, this card has just been a house and is awesome. And then Beast Whisperer, every time you cast one of your creature spells, you draw a card, just great value. So Naya are my favorite colors because I love all of the aggro and combatness that you get from green, red, and white, but also you get the best ramp. Green is just the best at ramp in a casual commander setting. Once you get to higher power, it's really, you're using rituals and rocks a lot more. But for a deck like this, you really want good, consistent, that ramp that's going to stay on board to help you make sure you keep getting creatures out and stuff like that. So, again, because we're also running green and red, we get my favorite ramp card. My favorite ramp card being Goblin and Archomancer. Talked about this card in the last video as well. This card's ridiculous. I'm not going to go too hard on it this video. I did go pretty hard on the last video. But yeah, fact that I can make your rampant growths cost 1, make your commander cost 1 less. Like, it's just so good. It is so good. And every time I have green-red in a deck, that's 3 or even 4 colors. If there's enough green and red focus on the deck, I'm probably running this card because it's just so useful. And then I'll quickly burn through the rest of the ramp category. These are all the 2-mana ramp spells. Again, I run these in essentially all of my green decks because they're so great. These are all, and then these are the 3 and 4 mana ramp spells. Again, I run these in essentially all my decks because they're so great. I will say Skyshroud Claim and Ranger's Path are amazing because you can color fix so well. You can go find a red-green and then a green-white source, so you get all of your colors that you need that way. I love both of these cards so much. And then I talked about it in the last video, but I've refound 2 removal cards that I get to put in this deck as well, and they're both amazing. I'm glad I get to talk about them again, and I hope more people play them. I wasn't seeing them in the wild, which I feel is a travesty because like, these cards are insane. They're so good, and more people should be running them. I should have been running them, and I will now. So those 2 cards I was talking about are Atrax's Fall and Hull Breach. These cards are ridiculous. Hull Breach is a 2-for-1, and Atrax's Fall is insanely modal. Artifact, battle, enchantment, or creature with flying, which is crazy. And then I also don't see Dismantling Wave that much in the wild as well. Every week I go to 2 different casual commander nights and at game stores that are relatively close to me. And because of that, I get to play a lot more commander than I used to. And I've noticed that, like, I don't see Dismantling Wave very often, or Atrax's Fall, or Hull Breach. Like, these cards are insanely powerful and good removal. Maybe I don't want to see them more because then people will be running more efficient removal and then my stuff goes away and then I'm sad. But these cards are insane, and I honestly think they should be going in your decks. They're so strong. And then some more ultra powerful removal. Everyone runs these cards. They're so ubiquitous at this point. Stroke of Midnight is kind of ridiculous. I know it can't hit a land, but giving a 1/1 instead of a 3/3 is so huge. That's so much better. A 1/1 is a chump blocker, while a 3/3 is a reasonable attacker and a reasonable blocker. A 3/3 creature can block and kill a bunch of stuff. So yeah, Stroke of Midnight, such a ridiculously good card. And then these are the last removal spells in the deck. Obviously Swords of Plowshares and Path to Exile. We have a white deck, 2 of the best white removal spells, or 2 of the best removal spells in the game. Gotta run them. And then Glorybringer. I feel like Glorybringer is definitely going to overperform in this deck. Vigilance, haste, exerting every turn, 4 damage to a non-dragon creature an opponent controls. And it's an opponent controls. You can attack one creature that you get a free attack on, and then you can point the damage at a different opponent to hit one of their creatures, so that maybe you get a free attack on them next turn or something. Glorybringer is ridiculous. So again, because I'm running a Naya deck, I'm running a pretty standard land package. There are some new lands that I'm going to quickly talk about because I think they're phenomenal. But yeah, a lot of typed lands because you can fetch them up with cards like Nature's Lore, 3 Visits, Skyshroud Claim, and Ranger's Path, as well as another land in the deck that can fetch typed lands, which is phenomenal as well. So I'm not sure if I've talked about it in a different video, but I'm definitely going to talk about it here, and just so I know I've talked about it, because I'm so excited about these lands. So in the bottom middle of the screen, you have Elegant Parlor. So back in the day, around Theros, they made a set of lands called the Temples, and they didn't have types, they were just lands, and when they entered the battlefield tapped, they tapped for 2 different colors, and then they scryed 1. Now we have, with the new set, MKM, these lands are out. So they're typed, so they're fetchable. They still enter tapped, which is fine, and then they surveil 1. That is insane. So people talk about scry as like 50% of a card, which I would agree with. Scrying 2 is almost as good. It's like maybe 95% of a card scrying 2. Like, it's almost as good as drawing a card. And scrying 3, that's like equivalent, if not more value than drawing a card, because you can filter away so much garbage. Surveil, depending on your deck, is anywhere from 50% to 100% of a card. Because if you're playing a deck that has a lot of graveyard synergies, surveilling away a card to your graveyard could be just as useful as drawing that card. I have a Muldrotha deck, and when I saw these lands were coming out, these lands in Muldrotha read as they're fetchable, and they draw a card when they enter the battlefield. That's what they read as to me. And that is insane. These lands are so strong. And they're relatively cheap right now. Like, I remember seeing the prices just go up now recently on like EDH Rec, or seeing them on Card Kingdom, like when other sources pull from other places, and they were like under $3 a land. So like, these lands are very affordable, and they're so good. I'm so excited to put these in essentially all of my decks, because if you look right above it, Alpine Meadow, I still will run the Snow lands because they are all fetchable with Into the North, and I love Into the North as a card. They're also typed, so they're fetchable that way. I think they're phenomenal for that. And also, if you have snow stuff you're running in your deck, they're also great for that reason. But there is the 10 lands that enter the battlefield tapped and are typed. They're just the tapped dual lands that are fetchable in that way. But the Surveil lands from MKM have just completely replaced those. And those lands weren't that good. They were fetchable, which made them good enough, but they were needing to be replaced in decks because they just weren't quite good enough. But now we have these, and say you have a Krosan Verge, you could potentially go get 2 of them and then Surveil 1 twice off of a Krosan Verge. Like, these cards are insane. I don't know if I'm like overhyping them. I don't feel like I am, though, because honestly, Surveil is not a mechanic that's printed a ton because it's so strong. In the right deck, it's almost as good, if not as good, maybe even sometimes better than drawing a card. Like, these lands are so good. I can't believe it. Like, holy crap, I'm so excited for these. And then also the obligatory, if you look to the top left, we have Bountiful Promenade, which is the Battle Bond lands, and Please, which is the coast. Put the Battle Bonds lands in the Commander Precons. Everyone would love you for it. So now for the maybes. This deck, I had a really difficult time cutting cards because there's a lot of cards with Exert, and picking and choosing which ones to go in got down to the wire, because if you notice, some of the Exert creatures I put in the deck aren't that good, but I felt like they were best for what I was going for. So some cards that didn't quite make the cut, Return of the Wild Speaker. Because your commander is a human, Return of the Wild Speaker wouldn't proc off that, and I'd rather just have the more consistency of Soul's Majesty being able to proc off your commander, which is great. Shamanic Revelation, I think just the other card draw cards are just better than this one, and I needed to make cuts, and I was happy with 10, so that's fine. Not Vine Paladin's really interesting. If it had Trample or Flying or something like that, I definitely would have kept it in the deck, but because it doesn't have Trample innately, and you need to have something else out to give it Trample, I'd rather have like Exert creatures that fit the theme of the deck, because they can also proc the other creatures you have that say whenever a creature exerts, as well as just, I liked the theming of that. Wolfgar of Icewind Dale feels like it should work, but Exert says as the creature attacks, you may exert it. It's not an attacking triggered ability, apparently. I just looked this up recently, and that's what it said online, some forum post, and also said it on Reddit as well, that, yeah, exert triggers like Glorybringer do not proc, like off Wolfgar. You don't get to exert twice or anything like that, which made me really sad, because I had him in the deck, because I really thought it was going to work, and then when I was kind of recording this video, I was like, huh, does that work? I've never checked. I think it works, but let's check, and it doesn't, so that's sad. And then Thembershad costs like $50, unfortunately, but, and I also wouldn't have put it in the deck, because, like, I'm not running a ton because, like, it would have just killed all of my creatures, because it doesn't say, like, your opponent's creatures, it's each other creature and each player, so it hits you and all of your opponents and all the creatures on board. Thembershad's hilarious, because he's a giant fat dragon Like, he's a 5/5 with trample, but when you exert him, he gains flying. He has to exert himself to fly. I love Thundershot. Thundershot is such a hilarious card. And if you watch the Dungeons and Dragons movie, like, this card is even better. Like, this is so fun. It's so funny. And then the last part of the maybes category, I was going to put in Bedlam, and then I kind of realized, wait, I'm giving my creatures vigilance so they can block in addition to attack. Bedlam seems kind of useless in this deck. So yeah, I cut it, even though I love running it, and I'm going to start running it in more decks. Concurrent Crossroads, Mass Hysteria, and Emblem of the Warmind, all just haste enablers. Emblem of the Warmind's interesting because it's 2 mana to give all of your creatures haste, but it's an aura, so you have to put it on a creature. And realistically, in this deck, you want to be able to, like, get out your auras, not auras, your enchantments and other stuff that give you haste, and not have them be tied to your commander, because your commander is the linchpin for this strategy, and I feel like people might remove your commander over the actual problematic stuff maybe sometimes. And if you put an emblem on the Warmind on your commander, it's going to make it a much juicier target that way. So yes, it's 1 mana cheaper, but the risk is not worth it. Brave the Sands is a very cool card. I was considering putting in other vigilance givers in the deck as well. Other cards like the Ajani Planeswalker that just innately gives your creatures vigilance and stuff like that. But I wanted to have more room for the card draw, the removal, the ramp, and then all of the haste enablers as well. So I'm just going to have Johan as the only vigilance enabler in the deck. Maybe you'd want to run 2 more just in case, kind of like how in Joda decks you run Fist of Suns just as a precautionary tale. Just if your commander's removed, if you have a Fist of Suns out or you have one in your hand, you get a 3 mana version of your commander out. But yeah, it was tough not putting in any other vigilance enablers. So that's the deck. I really hope you like it. I love putting it together, and I think it's an awesome deck. But yeah, let me know down in the comments. Did I miss any cards? Are there any cards you would have cut? Have you ever played with Johan? Have you ever played with Exert creatures in Commander? Have you ever given them vigilance before? I want to know if you have any stories about giving some of your Exert creatures vigilance and just going off or something like that. I'd love to hear about it. These are all my socials. I post whenever I go live on Twitter. I'm going to start posting soon on TikTok and Reddit. I know I say that in every video, but I think I finally figured out what I want to do there. I just need to figure out the format and how I want to do it, how I want to present it, which I think I'll be able to figure out and make some good content there. And then Architect and Mox Field are where all my deck lists live. So thanks for watching, and as always, get building, splainers. Alright, that is so